Senator from Alabama.
Madam President, before I begin, I want to first take a moment and remember those that lost their lives in a horrific car accident in Butler County, Alabama this past weekend. 10 people lost their lives. 9 of those were between ages 9 months and 17 years old. A majority of those killed were in a Tallapoosa County Girls Ranch bus. The Girls Ranch is an organization that I've been involved with for 20 years. It handles young kids that have been abused, young kids that have no parents. They started this ranch at most any age, and everything's paid for all the way through graduation of college. These kids were on a field trip coming from Baldwin County, Alabama this past weekend, involved in this horrific crash. There's no words that can bring the comfort to these families or these children. But my family, my staff, and the people of Alabama are praying for peace for all these affected during this unimaginable time. Madam President, as I and others have noted, Democrats call their flagship voting bill For the People Act. But a better and more fitting title is the Nancy Pelosi Power Grab Act. My Republican colleagues have done a good job of highlighting the many flaws of this legislation in the past couple of weeks, including doing away with common sense fraud protection like voter ID, forcing mandatory same-day registration on every state, allowing paid political operatives to harvest voter ballots, and directing taxpayer dollars to the campaigns of progressive politicians. Sadly, there's plenty more. But let me also note that this recent, quote, compromise is anything but a compromise among Democrats should have been their starting offer to Republicans, not their final offer. The most recent versions still run afoul of the Constitution by trampling on the First Amendment rights of free speech and taking away redistricting from the states. And while ID is still required to vote, the bill expands what kind of ID meets that requirement, such as a utility bill. But the last time I looked, there was not a photo on our utility bill. The most secure form of identification is a government-issued photo ID. States shouldn't be forced to water that down. Americans want faith and trust in the integrity of their election process. This bill does not provide solutions to strengthen these processes. And once Americans learn what's in this bill, they will agree. The Pelosi power grab yanks power from the states. The Pelosi power grab lets politicians stuff their pockets with taxpayers' dollars. And guess what, folks? A slightly different version of a federal takeover of election is still a federal takeover of elections. That's exactly what this new version of S1 is. It's hard to even call this version of S1 a compromise when the Democrats only compromise with members of their own party. This was not a bipartisan negotiation to get an end product that both sides of the aisle could support. The last time I checked, we still have a 50-50 Senate. There has been no negotiation with our side. But regardless of its form, this bill does not solve the problems currently facing our election system. It makes the problems worse. You know, in sports, one team changing the rules by themselves is called cheating. It is seen for what is, a power grab. It is stacking the rules to win the game instead of doing the hard work necessary to get the job done. Folks may be scratching their head as to why one political party thinks they can completely change the rules of elections all by themselves. But if you've been paying attention to what the progressives have been up to recently, it won't come as a big surprise. Changing our country as we know it is the end game. That's why they want to pass this Pelosi power grab, so those who disagree with them have a harder time winning at the ballot box. But it's not just elections. Remember when they tried to hoodwink us with defund the police last year? Remember when they tried to walk that back? But they had made their position very clear. And now we're seeing the same thing with education, as critical race theory is pushed on school districts across the country. Simply put, critical race theory reinforces divisions on strict racial lines. It doesn't teach kids moral values like treating everyone with respect, regardless of race. It's just the opposite. Critical race theory teaches kids to hate one another. That's one thing schools should absolutely absolutely not be teaching. But again, for Democrats, it's about changing the way we view our country. What we should be focusing on is actually improving education all over this country. The American people need to realize how far we've fallen behind. As the columnist Mark Stein wrote, quote, "Education is the biggest structural defect in our society. We have almost entirely corrupt and abusive education establishment." Here's where that education establishment has got us. We're 37th in the world in math, 13th in reading, 18th in science. In 2019, only 35% of our fourth graders, 35% of our fourth graders were able to read at the fourth grade reading level. 35%, embarrassing. That was lower than 2 years before. And it was before the teachers' unions kept kids out of school all of this past year. You can imagine how it is today. It is unacceptable. It should be unacceptable to every member of this body. We've got China outpacing us in every industry and at every level of our economy, but Democrats are too busy painting the United States as the world's villain. How can we expect our young people to defend the United States abroad if they don't learn about the things that make America the greatest country in the history of the world? We, as elected representatives of Americans across the country, should be doing everything, and I mean everything, we can to create opportunity and to protect the freedoms that make this country great. It seems like folks across the aisle are interested in that. They have a completely different vision of and for our country, one that most Americans don't agree with at all. I bet if you ask folks back home if they want a bigger government and less state and local power, they'd say, no way. I bet if you ask them if a federal power grab sounds like a good idea, they would say no. I bet if you ask them if they want their kids to learn to be more divided by race, they would also say no. They would tell you that they want their freedoms protected. They would tell you that they want the federal government out of the way. They want an education for children that provides opportunity, because education is the key to freedom and success. Education can unlock every student's God-given potential, but critical race theory swallows that key. The Pelosi power grab just fills the lot with cement. Ladies and gentlemen, For the People Act is one party's attempt to rewrite the rules of the game in hope that they'll get a permanent advantage, plain and simple. It's really a shame. We're spending so much time on bills that the American people don't want, bills that don't have bipartisan support. So I urge my colleagues to come together and find solutions that will unite us as Americans, not divide us further as a country. Thank you, Madam President. Nobody's up. For a quorum call.
Clerk will report the roll.